Hello, welcome to Eye on Africa here on France 24. I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, some 6,000 Islamic State group fighters could be on the brink of returning home to Africa. The African Union says countries across the continent must bolster intelligence cooperation to avoid bloodshed. A devastating fire tears through Bamako's main market, causing widespread damage and destroying traders' livelihoods. Our correspondents report from the Malian capital. And in South Africa, we follow Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma on the campaign trail. The ANC presidential hopeful is tipped to win the party leadership this weekend. Just don't call her the ex-wife of the president. Good to have you with us. First up, a stark warning from a top security official at the African Union. Up to 6,000 African jihadists who fought for the Islamic State group could return home and wreak havoc across the continent. The AU's Commissioner for Peace and Security, Ismail Chergui, says African nations need to be prepared, calling for cooperation when it comes to sharing information and coordinating intelligence activities. The IS group has suffered major losses in recent months, with militants driven out of their strongholds in both Iraq and Syria. Let's get more details from France 24's expert on jihadist movements, Wasim Nasser.
We should be very careful with the official numbers because nobody went and counted the jihadis. That's a fact today. We know that many numbers were made bigger than they really was regarding the Islamic State, or less than they were really by officials for many reasons. But I think that the number of 6,000 could be plausible, or even more. We should imagine that jihadi movements are the only revolutionary offer today on the market, and that many groups will end up following or fighting under the jihadi banner, of course with the local dynamics each and every time. We can think that climate change can make things much more complicated. We saw many Pearl, for example, from the Pearl people joining jihad lately. Those were not at all involved in these issues a few years ago. We see that many Tuareg are attracted by jihad today, despite the fact that their fight was much local in the Azawad region. So it's a dynamic that's going to be much more complicated, and I guess we're going to witness an uprise of those movements either in Africa or in Asia.
Wasim Nasser there. Well, on Sunday, 6 people were killed after an attack on an armed Tuareg group in Mali's northwestern city of Timbuktu. Security sources suspect militants from the local branch of al-Qaeda are responsible. The region has been rocked by clashes between pro-government fighters and former rebels, despite signing a peace deal in 2015. Al-Qaeda-linked groups have added to the bloodshed. Well, staying in Mali, a massive fire swept through the main market in the capital, Bamako, causing major damage and destroying the livelihoods of hundreds of market traders. The devastating blaze broke out in the early hours of Monday morning, with authorities now investigating whether the flames were accidental or the work of arsonists. The pink market had burnt down before in 2014 and was undergoing renovation work. This report from our correspondents Anthony Fouchard and Katerina Vitozzi.
Breaking locks, residents and firefighters try and get into these shops. Inside, a fire is raging. All of the capital's firefighters have been called in. That's more than 160 men to fight this blaze that's broken out in the worst possible place.
It's at the heart of the market. We were worried about the fire reaching the buildings. That would have been devastating. We had major access problems to get to the fire, and there was a problem with water too. We had to travel 3 kilometers to get more. There were fire hydrants in the market, but they weren't working.
The centre of this historic market has been gutted. Reached by narrow passageways, it's always hard to get here. Alongside the firefighters, residents, even children, have turned out to help.
The fire started at 3 a.m. We are in this together. We are Malian. Helping goes without saying.
Some try their best to save what remains, but for most traders, it's already too late.
This is my shop where I sold shoes. There's nothing left. Nothing at all. Everything is gone.
The fire broke out in 3 different locations at nearly the same time. That's puzzled the authorities, currently working to determine the cause of this devastating fire.
Now, it's a fight for survival. Residents of some townships in Cape Town say they've become prisoners in their own homes, forced to stay inside as rival gangs battle for control of the streets. The worsening violence has led South African authorities to call on the army to step in a desperate bid to bring back order.
A young man has been shot dead in this township in Cape Town, another victim in battles between rival gangs. As usual, police rush to the scene, and bystanders are left struggling to cope with the constant stress caused by gang violence.
I immediately get up from my bed and get under my bed, because that's how freaked out I am.
I think for many of us, we don't know what peace is. We don't know what harmony is. We've grown up with violence all our lives.
The township has one of the highest gang-related murder rates in South Africa. Locals fear for their lives when walking the streets, with more than 50 people caught in the crossfire in the past 4 months. High unemployment and widespread social problems lead many residents to find work with the gangs.
There's a lot of what seems to be cooperation between the community and the gangs. Not because people want to, but because people's circumstances force them to cooperate with the gangs for their own survival.
The lucrative drug trade and other criminal activities mean that gangs have mushroomed and become more heavily armed. Police battle to suppress turf wars and reprisal attacks. So much so that the provincial government is considering calling for the deployment of the army.
If soldiers are brought in not as soldiers, but in terms of Section 30 of the Defence Act, as force multipliers for the police, that will give us the numbers and the visibility that we require. And that makes an enormous difference.
Soldiers were previously deployed to these townships in 2015, but 2 years later, gang membership in the area has soared, and some believe that the only long-term solution would be major social and economic change.
And finally, it's a nail-biting race that's set to go down to the wire. South Africa's ruling ANC is gearing up to elect a new party leader to succeed President Jacob Zuma. The fiercely contested vote will be a face-off between 2 candidates, the country's deputy and favourite to win, Cyril Ramaphosa, and Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, former chairperson of the African Union Commission and also Jacob Zuma's ex-wife. Our correspondents Caroline Dumais and Stephen Carstens hit the campaign trail alongside her as she sets out to convince South Africans that she is not her ex-husband.
She might be one of the most difficult South African politicians to follow. Her program is confidential and her bodyguards are efficient. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma does not need the media to build up popularity. Everybody knows her after she chaired the African Union Commission, and before that, she was South Africa's Minister of Home Affairs. She likes to campaign in churches, choirs, create special songs for her. She is soft-spoken, but her program is radical. Free education, land expropriation, bank nationalization. She wants change.
Peace cannot be achieved if people are hungry, if people are homeless, if people are landless, if people are ill, if people have no access to education, if the economy does not belong to all.
She has her own ideas, and she hates when people call her the ex-wife of. She reminds everybody in her meetings that she was an ANC activist before marrying Jacob Zuma. So when there is a present for the president, somebody else takes it. Some say she almost quit the presidential race, as the name of the father of her 4 children is a heavy one to carry. But her backers convinced her to stay.
Without partiality, stretch forth your hands towards our leader.
We establish her to the mission you have appointed her to accomplish. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
South Africa needs to fight poverty. We can't do it without transforming our economy radically. And so it's time, not just for its sake, but for the sake of our people. The status quo of 50% of our people poor, of the rising unemployment of young people is unsustainable, even for peace. Thank you.
But do you think...
She's on a mission, and slowly but surely, Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma makes her mark in politics.
Well, that's it for this edition of Eye on Africa. Stay with us here on France 24. Lots more news coming up.